The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody. It's Peter Evers here with Humanity First again. And today we're going to talk about raising money. We're going to talk about philanthropy and the role that philanthropy plays in society and specific to human services, but also to museums and hospitals and universities, that kind of thing, and how important raising money is. And it is extraordinarily important in human services where I work. It is important because we do receive a lot of funding that comes from the government, but it's never quite enough to provide the high level quality service that we're looking to do. And so we raise a lot of money for BAMSI, but we also do it in small donations. We really don't have what they call angel giver donors to BAMSI. We have people who are in our community, who care about the services that we provide, who feel like that BAMSI is a part of our community, and we can show that we help every member of our community, especially those who are vulnerable. For example, we've spoken before about our helpline, which is a number that people can call to get assistance with things like first and last month's rent, things like paying for energy costs with no questions asked, as long as we have the resources to do that. That is really important for an organization that considers itself a part of the community. And it's really important that we have a lot of people giving a little money, because we build a base of philanthropy. And through that, people get interested in the services that we're providing. And with that, come aware of the social justice issues that we're dealing with in our society. So we really cover an awful lot of bases with philanthropy and fundraising. And I think the call to action here is that we want us and the people who give to reflect the values of our community. And we need support for the causes that we take on that aren't always that popular, but are the right thing to do. So it's about education, it's about addressing social justice, it's about raising money, and it's about being embedded in our community. And we are going to, in the next segment, talk to Sarah Gannett, who has been on the program before. She's the VP of Marketing, Philanthropy and Communications here at BAMSI, and she's going to talk a little bit more broadly about the big issues about philanthropy and also some of the things that BAMSI is doing to stay relevant in the philanthropy market. So we'll be right back. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse, and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to Humanity First. My name is Peter Evers, and as I promised at the beginning of segment of the show, we have Sarah Gannett with us. Actually, probably for the second time, right, Sarah?
Yes, it's my second time. Thank you.
You're an old pro at this, and so you'll have no problems whatsoever. And, I began the first segment by talking a little bit about the root of community philanthropy and how important that is. And I'd like to dive into it a little bit. And just so everyone knows, Sarah Gannett is our VP of Philanthropy, Marketing and Communications as well, or Mark and Phil, as we sometimes call them. And has been in this position for about...
Coming up on 2 years. It'll be 2 years in September. Yeah. Flown by.
But also has a very long history with working for hospital systems, United Way, that kind of thing. So Sarah comes to us with an awful lot of experience in terms of fundraising in communities for big institutions and smaller ones. And you have done a wonderful job when you've been here, when you've been at BAMSI. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done over the last couple of years, including and culminating maybe in our golf tournament that we had earlier this week, and a few things that we should look forward to. But let's start with the idea of fundraising. I mentioned at the top of the hour that we are an organization that cannot just rely on the funds that come from the state, although we're very grateful for those states, but they don't always match up to the needs and the expenses that we have. And in comes philanthropy. Talk a little bit about some of the pluses about raising money in a human service organization. And begin with the premise, because we're going to talk a little bit about angel givers. We're going to talk about people who come along and give a lot of money, which actually can have a downside, to be honest with you. But talk a little bit about the benefit of small donations by a lot of people. I sound like in a political campaign at the moment, but it's true for us as well, right?
Absolutely. And that is a good comparison, because I think, factually, any community-based nonprofit needs that solid base of community support, right? I think, as you mentioned, we'll talk about huge givers, and I think it's a misconception sometimes that you need to give hundreds of thousands or thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. That about 60% of donations to nonprofits are those smaller donors, if you will, the folks who give anywhere from $1 to $100, and they're really the base for most nonprofits, particularly community nonprofits like BAMSI. Those individuals often grow into your larger donors over the years, and the cumulative impact they have. And also, in reflecting on the size of the donation, it's not always that. It's their network. It's them going out into the community and talking about their engagement with the organization. A lot of the donors in that $1 to $100 range are volunteers too, which has a tremendous impact.
So if we do something like a fun run, which we did last year, and that increases our donor base, doesn't it? Because people raise a little bit of money and they're probably raising something like $100 or something like that.
Correct.
The hope is that those people then have an attachment to BAMSI, that the messages that they're giving is like, this is an organization you should get behind.
Yes, and then they engage their network of friends, right? And those friends might give $5, $10, $20, but it's that cumulative effect of getting the word out to the community.
Yeah, and that's true because you think about who people give money to, right? So they give money to their university, often college or whatever you want to call it. They give money to a hospital. Yeah. Because, maybe they've been a benefactor of that. I always think about when I worked for Boston Medical Center, our rival, if you like, was Mass General.
Yes.
And we had repeat visitors, and those at Boston Medical Center, they were a very different sort of income class than those people at Mass General, and they get a lot of money in big donations. I think about museums as well. But really, the lifeblood of human service is small giving, right? As opposed to those, naming a building after a family or something.
Right, because that is a common misconception, and I think there's a lot of notoriety in the news for like the larger donations for research, for higher ed, and those are very important. But community-based organizations and religious institutions really rely on the base of the community, because those are their supporters. Those are the people who most often utilize the services or programs they offer. And those are the people who most often volunteer. So yeah, it's different. Nonprofits, have different target audiences and target groups of donors. And for BAMSI, yes, the community is very much it.
So tell me about one of the difficulties we have at BAMSI is people think of us as a government-funded organization, and we do, as I said, we do receive a lot of funding from the government. How do we begin to distinguish ourselves from an arm of the government? Because we really need to do that, right? We need to be able to raise money that sort of bridges that gap between what we get and the excellence and quality of care that we can deliver.
Well, I think, government funding, particularly for BAMSI and a lot of organizations similar to ours, multi-service organizations, obviously state, federal funding is very important. But I think we differentiate ourselves by how embedded we are in the community. A lot of the services, the extras that we provide for our clients or our persons served aren't necessarily always covered by those contracts. So I think making that connection. I think that's where volunteers are so important, getting volunteers into the programs to experience what the needs are and to see where they can be helpful and where those additional donations can really supplement some of the gaps for the individuals that we serve, because there is a tremendous need, even above and beyond what we're able to provide.
Right. Can you give an example of something that we buy above and beyond that enhances the life of people?
Absolutely. So think of our, our early intervention and our WIC programs are very well funded by government funding sources for the needs of program participants. But when you think about parents and families, particularly with the costs of goods and services right now, doing holiday toy drives, that we do an extensive holiday toy drive or early intervention program, and have a lot of monetary donors who will give a monetary donation to the program so that they can go out and buy things, toys, clothes, things around the holidays, but other things like diapers, wipes, essential items, formula, that, some of that is covered by what folks receive in their benefits, but a lot of times it isn't. And those items are extremely expensive. And, you see individuals kind of rationing that out, which isn't something, you want a family or a parent ever to experience.
Yeah. I think one of the purest forms of giving that we have here at BAMSI, and because that's what we're talking about, is the helpline.
Yes.
This idea, and I always feel like we always have to plug the helpline because it is direct help to people in need, right?
So yeah, the helpline is a perfect example. So people who are in a crisis situation, who are not able to make their rent for that month, or who are not able to pay their utility bills or have gotten behind, and we're able to, that's actually one of BAMSI's programs that really doesn't receive any sort of state or federal funding. That relies pretty much exclusively on the donations from the community, some foundations, and some corporate grants, but really individuals giving to it. And it helps people in the immediacy, but also that funding goes towards the individuals who work at the program and answer the phones, so that they can, when someone's struggling like that, they can work with them to come up with a plan, so that they're hopefully not calling helpline back. That's the goal, right? You call helpline, we're able to provide that monetary support, but the donations also support staff that are there, that are knowledgeable and able to hook people up with resources so that they can get on a trajectory so they're not in need of helpline services.
Yeah. It's funny because the mayor of Brockton, Mayor Sullivan, comes on this show regularly. And if I see him on the street, because you do see him on the street, he's always on the street and opening something or making a speech somewhere. He sees me and he says, BAMSI, helpline. And because it is really a program that a lot of people relied on, especially during COVID. I mean, I think we probably distributed a couple of $100,000 worth of assistance to people during that time. And that's really significant in that period, that everybody knows how difficult that was.
Definitely.
Let's pivot a little bit, because I think as we look at, and this may be true for all generations, but people, there is no profile for the person that gives, right? It is really how they feel and how they connect. Are you worried about young people and giving, or is this just a generational thing that young people don't tend to give until they're older? Or how do you think in the business, I'm not necessarily talking about BAMSI, how do you think we address that? What's the best way of addressing philanthropy with people who are starting out, who probably don't have too much money, actually?
Well, it's interesting. Young people today are a lot more savvy than they were, right? Decades ago. You would, back 20, 30, 40, even 10 years ago, you would give to an organization because you went to school there, because that was your church. But now you see young people, in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, early 30s, who want to see the impact of what they're doing, right? They're a lot more savvy. They ask a lot more questions. And their giving is in lower denominations, but you see a lot more of them volunteering. You see the volunteerism rates have risen 20 to 30% in that demographic, the early 20s over the past, couple of decades. A lot of that is, focus on community service learning in schools, those kinds of things that are kind of ingraining that in the culture. So I think sometimes the younger generations get a bad rap for saying they're not engaged, because they're not necessarily, what we're thinking of our baby boomers who write that, $500 check to their local hospital because that's where they have their children and that's where they give. They want to see the impact, and some of those are global charities, organizations that on a lot of social justice issues. So I think, younger generations are definitely engaged, just in a different way. They want to be more hands-on, I think, than years ago.
And volunteering for those organizations, right? And that you see people on the street taking petitions, and there really is a groundswell, I think, of the politicization of that group.
Yes.
Which maybe has been missing for a couple of generations. I don't know, but that's good to hear. We mentioned earlier on these sort of angel givers, and there's a couple of good examples, right? Mackenzie Scott, who
Absolutely.
I'm sure everybody knows, and I'm sort of fascinated by her journey. Somebody who is a wonderful writer. I don't know if anybody's ever read any of her books, but also. She happened to marry Jeff Bezos, I think in 1993 or something like that. And they separated in 2019, and that made her the third wealthiest woman in the world. Definitely. And the 47th wealthiest person in the world. What does she do? Because she's making a massive impact in the field, isn't she?
She is, and she, similar to what, I was saying about younger generations, she's focusing on things that have long-term impact, social issues, really getting in there. You see, traditionally you've seen donors at that level, to what you were saying before, Peter, about, naming a building, right? That was very important to them, the recognition. And there's certainly something to be said for that. Absolutely that. But she has a totally different approach. It's not so much the recognition, it's more of the impact and the collective impact. It's incredible for someone who, came into that wealth and has really made it a priority. She did sign the Giving Pledge, not legally binding necessarily, but there is that honor to that, to give away your entire, all of your wealth within your lifetime. And she certainly, out of the gate, has started, she's definitely living that premise right there.
Right. And then we have a local version of that, right? Robert Hales, is that right?
Yes, Robert Hales. So a kind of a neat example on a different, maybe a little smaller scale, but not really when you think about it. He, what's interesting about what Robert Hale has done is he gives $1 million gifts to really small nonprofits in a lot of ways, to institute endowments, right? Which is something that a lot of nonprofits struggle with, right? It's your savings account, it's your safety net. And smaller nonprofits in particular struggle to have an endowment. And that's why a lot of them, even though they're doing impactful work, aren't sustainable. So he saw, the need to from those nonprofits to have kind of that security so that they can do their work. So that's incredible as well. And he's done some other really great things, looking at local universities, talking about the younger generation. He recently, for the graduating class of UMass Dartmouth 2024, he went to the campus and gave each student $1,000, $500 for themselves and $500 to invest or to give to a nonprofit that they feel is worthy. And, he didn't ask, no strings attached. He didn't ask for reports back and make sure, it was an honor system. And it's incredible when you look back, you can go to UMass Dartmouth's website and see what some of the students have done. And that kind of, that will stick with them throughout as they embark on their careers. And, many of them will be extremely successful. And to have had that catalyst, right out of the gate at graduation that's impactful.
I think, I mean, it's an amazing thing. I don't know about you, but, I often have daydreams about what it would be like if I was a multimillionaire. And we all do, right? And one of them is, I would be a philanthropist and I'd give away money. But of course, that's never really going to be tested. So I'm going to stick with that story. But it is extraordinary that people do that with their wealth. And I agree. I mean, that there's a bit of a bug about giving, right? You get the bug of giving because you suddenly realize that there's actually more joy in giving than receiving. And that's a lesson sometimes people take a while to find out, and to actually instill that in young people as they come out into the world is just such a wonderful idea.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to think about. So as we sort of wrap up here, we looking to the future. What are some of the things that you worry about in terms of our ability to continue to raise money in the community and support our programs? And what's something that you're joyful about as you look to the future in terms of the ability of our communities to give to agencies like BAMSI?
Well, I mean, I think the worry is always the worry that's universal, right? It's the top of the political concerns, economic stability, right? You see that giving overall from individuals has gone down about 2% over the past year, which usually you see incremental rises, and that's indicative of the economy. So, right, fundraisers watch the economy very closely because people aren't giving away money when they are nervous that they need it themselves, right? You need to take care of your family, your own needs first, and then help others. So that's always a tremendous concern. You want the economy to be thriving. I do think, though, having been in fundraising, for a couple of decades now, I think what's nice is that there's always that competitive nature in fundraising, right? There's with nonprofits doing their work, but I think over the past several years, that collaborative nature of people not necessarily fighting over donations or fighting, to get to actually looking at it and saying, how can we tackle this issue together and take that donor's dollar and make it stretch further, right? Rather than giving $1 here, $1 here, why don't we come together and see what we can do? And you can really maximize that. You see that with a lot of foundations are focusing on that. And that's what donors want to see too. They want to see different nonprofits working together. So that's very heartening. I think the competitiveness is, will always be there, but it's in a more productive way now than, trying to, everyone racing for the donations from donors.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that I hope for is more economic justice for people so that we aren't forever relying on philanthropy, that philanthropy is not in exchange for funding for things that are basic human rights, like clean water and housing and those kind of things. But there is so much of a place for us in the work that we do in raising money, and raising money is just not raising money. It's actually growing friends. It's growing people who have a great idea about what you do and an idea of the social justice element of what we do as well. It's not unusual, I think, sometimes for people who are quite well off to be exposed to some of the situations that people live in, who we help, and I think that helps as well. In terms of an understanding of the difficulties that many of the people that we serve struggle with on a day-to-day basis. Sarah, it has been a pleasure as usual and enlightening as usual. So thank you so much for coming. And as I always say, when people do really well on the show, we'll ask you to come back again, maybe in a few months, and we can see where we are now. The last thing that I just want to mention is our own fundraising efforts. And I know that you've got something to say about our Viewpoint after we had a golf tournament this last week, but we're actually going into another event, which I just want you to talk about, if you want.
Absolutely. So golf tournament's always a great fundraiser, kind of a traditional type fundraiser that engages a smaller group of people. But we are doing our Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid segment that aired earlier this year. We are doing, featuring our COPE centers, a second premiere night. We did our first back in the late spring in Brockton, and we are doing one in Plymouth at the in conjunction with the Plymouth COPE and the Plymouth Library on October 23rd. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about the COPE Center, the programs and services and harm reduction support that they provide. And also, while it's a community event, there's also an opportunity to donate to support the individuals. Going into the winter months, I know our COPE centers see a lot of folks who are unsheltered, who are in needs of the basic things that, a lot of us take for granted: coats, socks, hats, things like that. So it's a great opportunity to learn about the programs on October 23rd, and also to support the COPE centers both in Plymouth and Brockton.
Yeah, our first one was a wonderful success, and I'm sure the next one in Plymouth will be. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll come back in October and see how that went.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.